Okay, this video I'm going to talk about how I glue my hidden-tang handles. So hidden-tang meaning there's a a tang that goes in the slot like this, whereas opposed to full-tang where it goes around and you can see the tang around the perimeter. General process is clean everything, then I squeeze some epoxy in here, then I coat everything, make sure all the surfaces inside and out are coated, and then shove it in there and let it cure. But there's a lot that can go wrong. If you mess up some steps, you might pay for it later down the road. Some of the things that I've done before getting this all prepped is I make sure the tang is all roughed up. So you want rough surfaces. Can you be quiet on the set?
I'm doing my job. This is my video. You do your video.
So I make sure all the surfaces are roughed up so that the epoxy can bind and adhere to it better. And I grind these little notches in here. These notches are just to kind of do a pseudo mechanical fastening in there, because if it's just a flat thing, it might hold, but over time, maybe that epoxy will get weaker in like, a couple decades or something, and then it'll come loose. So these little tiny notches here are just to help keep it together for a long time. And then the other things that I do before gluing all this up is I make sure the front area is all finished up and tidy. Like this should be completely done. So this flat face is all done. I did the chamfers on the handles because technically you can do the chamfers after it's glued, but you're gonna have a blade in the way. So it's easier to do it all right now. And then, that's it. Gluing a hidden-tang is easy. Why I like to do hidden-tangs is flexibility of shapes. So with full-tang blades, you can do a lot of different shapes, but I like to do really complex, excuse me.
Dude, that's our cap. What the fuck?
I like to do really ornate shapes and like really complex tapers and all that kind of stuff. And most of the time, hidden-tangs, for me, give more flexibility as far as shape goes like that. So like, for example, this is a really complicated geometric thing. And if I was to attempt that on a full-tang knife, I don't think I could be able to do it. Like, it's so much easier for me to shape this all as one piece off of the blade and then get it as close as I can, then glue it and do final touches that way. The full-tang is easier for more, not basic, but more straightforward shapes, because when the blade is on there, you don't want to run the blade into the grinder on accident when you're shaping it. I've done that, especially on these swooping curves. Trying to do that on the grinder with the handle on, or with the blade on there, can be pretty difficult. Okay, so for cleaning these, the tang is pretty straightforward. I just clean all the oil and fingerprints off of that. That's pretty straightforward. For inside of here, some of these have been bedded. So there's like a little bit of Vaseline when we coat the tang in Vaseline and fit it up with epoxy. Like some of the handles with like the bolsters and stuff like that, we fit them up and glue them before doing anything else. So there's there's Vaseline in the tang cavity that we need to clean out. So I just take a little bit of acetone, get it in the cap, and I just tilt it and pour some in the tang cavity. I just shake that a bunch. Dump that shit out. And I'll do that a couple times just to make sure that it's all cleaned out. And then once I clean it with acetone, I'll go over it with denatured alcohol, because acetone leaves a thin film. It's probably fine, but if you're putting in all this work, you should do it just to kind of like have safety of mind. You want these as clean as possible. Anyways, the negative stigma of hidden-tang knives is a lot of like the really cheap factory knives. They have like stick welded tangs welded on. And so the failure that comes with those is you've got basically a dissimilar metal that's just really shittily welded on to one of the critical areas. So that's why a lot of people say, oh, Full-tangs are better, but it's actually just a myth that was rooted in poor factory knives back in the day. Anyways, so Sam mixed up the glue. It's a 2-part epoxy. It's West Systems G-Flex. It's a 24-hour glue, which generally the longer the cure time, the stronger the epoxy is. So we're using the 24-hour stuff, which is really strong. This stuff will last you a long time. So I've used some cheap epoxy in the past with like my really early knives, and it expands, it lets go. It doesn't hold on for very long, and it's just not very great. But since using this epoxy with like the proper surface prep and stuff like that, we've never really had a failure. Most of the don't look at me like that.
Don't lie to the people.
The failures have been rooted in
user error.
User error. Yeah, not cleaning things, not prepping right, not making,
mechanical adhering.
Yeah, the mechanical adhesion is very important. Oh, one other note is when you're mixing it for a long time. Like once you put the 2 parts together, you have to mix it for like a whole minute. Just to make sure that the 2 parts have they're already combined, and there's not like pockets of resin and pockets of whatever the other stuff is. Hardener. So what I'm doing now is I'm getting a little bit of epoxy, and I'm just gonna drip it right into the hole, and I'll just let that kind of flow down the handle. I don't do any like syringes or any like weird injection stuff. Like this works just fine, and I don't have to get any extra stuff. So I'll do that first. I'll just do like 1 drip to let it fall all the way to the bottom, and then I'll get that back later. I'll just prop this up like that. And then I coat the tang. I coat the tang completely, everything. Make sure that there's no spots that aren't coated. You have to coat both objects. Like you can't just coat one, shove it in, and then you expect that it adheres to both. The epoxy has to grab to both. Nice thing about hidden-tangs is like once you get everything fitted together, everything else afterwards is pretty straightforward. Like this video is just like clean everything, get some glue in there, coat the tang, get glue in the tang and mash them all together, and then stick it in and clamp it. That's it. Whereas you've got this whole ordeal to go through.
Don't pretend like it's all butterflies and sunshine. It's a fucking mess. You stick it in there and it diarrheas out the top, and then you have to like have a third arm to clamp it into place. Bitch.
Okay. So
also fitting bolsters is a butt.
No, the fitment
is worse if anything.
Yeah. Okay, so I've got the glue in there. I've waited a bit for it to kind of just flow down, and I've coated the tang. So now I want to make sure that everything the tang is basically grabbing to, the inside cavity of the cavity is actually coated with epoxy also. So I'm just going to take the tang, I'm just going to shove it in there.
Out of context, that sounds really bad.
This probably doesn't sound great on camera.
Here, put it next to your mic. There you go. That's what inside the cavity sounds like.
But I'm shifting the amount of pressure and where the pressure is on like pretty much every corner of the handle. So like I'm going to apply some to this corner, get that coated up in there, and then I'm going to shift it to this corner, get that coated up in there, and then basically just move it in and out, coat everything, the front, the back. And then we'll see if a lot of glue gobs out. A little bit. And then I'm gonna add some more. Once that's done and you've coated everything in there, then you just add a bunch more epoxy, and then hopefully you've got enough in there that when you put the tang back in, there's enough that it starts flowing out, and you can see that there's enough glue there. So, oh God. So I'm doing the same thing with this one. This is the other handle. Had epoxy flowing down there, coated the tang. Now I'm going to do the same thing with this. These are frame handles, meaning there's an inner frame that hugs around the tang, and then you get everything else like the right thickness. So there's no real huge gaps in the tang cavity, so you don't have to fill it a lot, which is nice. But if you had a big honking hole in there and you had to fill a lot, it might be hard to align the handle when you're gluing it. So it could be a good idea to actually bed in the tang, which means fill the tang with epoxy and fill the cavity with epoxy and coat the tang with some sort of resist like Vaseline or a wax. So then everything solidifies. You've got this nice cavity that's the exact same shape as your tang. So when you go to finally glue it, it's all straight and exactly where it's going to be. Okay. Okay, so this now has enough epoxy. It's just going to start dripping out. So I'll just start dumping that in the trash can. So just now I pushed it all the way in, and I had a lot of the epoxy that just come out the front of it. So I know there's epoxy all up in there. And I just need to push that together, wipe off the excess, and then check it in a bit to make sure that I get all of the epoxy off of the front, because you don't want to let it cure in there and then you have to like somehow clean it up afterwards. That would be a huge blunder. Okay, so now I've pushed it in there. I've got the excess epoxy kind of around the front. I'm just gonna wipe a lot of that off. I don't need all of it off because in about an hour, I'll do my final wiping once the epoxy has kind of set just a little bit, not fully cured. But right now I'm just checking if there's any major gaps that we need to push in the handle more. This would be a nightmare if I pushed it all together and it didn't fit. Like you see the shoulder gap and stuff like that. But that, I've had that happen. That's, you gotta take off the blade and then clean everything and somehow clean up the epoxy in there. And then refit up the shoulder in the front of the handle. So it turns a 1 hour job into 2 days.
That's why we're so good at this job, Don. It's because we've made all the mistakes already.
We still make mistakes.
Yeah, but that's how you get better.
One other thing to be cautious of is on these knives, the scratch pattern goes along the blade. So you don't want to take some abrasive cloth and just start scrubbing it perpendicular, because then you'll get all these nasty scratches in here that don't fit in with the blade, and it's basically impossible to refinish that area. Like you can, it's never gonna look super clean again, and it's a huge pain in the ass.
Like pants shitting pain in the ass, because if you fuck up, you just make it worse.
Yep. Yeah, so I'm just taking this little paper towel right here, and I'm going parallel to the blade, and I just do this little sweeping motion to get out most of that epoxy. So on these, depending on how your fit is, this one's pretty tight. Like I don't have to use any clamps really. You just set it on there and then check in an hour. On these, I leave the butt of the handle unfinished mostly. Like I leave it flat. This one's G10, so it's really strong, so I can just tap it on there and make sure it's fully set and sits right in there. But this one, for example, this is slightly more loose and it moves quite a bit. It's not super loose, but just a little bit. So I'm going to use a clamp that we made. It's not the best clamp. One day we need to make a better one. But the idea is you clamp the blade in here, and you tighten all that, and then you can start cinching the blade down into the handle. So like this. So as I'm saying, we need a better one. This moves down and stuff like that. So I'm going to take this blade, stick it in through there. Set that. Tighten these down. See, one of the problems is both of these spin, so you have to have like 3 hands to do this. And the other big problem is it only grabs it on this small footprint. So if I was to make this like a new version, I would make it much wider and maybe be able to pivot so that it sits flush onto the bevel. But just tighten that. And then I can start just moving this and tightening the blade into the handle. And this isn't a super loose fit, so I don't need this like way tight up in there. This is just to kind of hold it in place.
And look at the hassle that is. Whoever made that piece of machinery is an idiot.
Didn't you make this? Okay, looks like there's no big gaps. I'm not worried about like the little bit of epoxy at the seam because I'm going to clean that off in just a little bit when the epoxy is set a little bit more. If I clean it off right now, it would just keep oozing a little bit more into that Fitup. So this is ready to set down and get back to it later. This one, I'm going to check that Fitup again. Looks good to me. So this is also ready to just set and not forget, but to check back in an hour. So my conclusion on gluing these hidden tangs is do your prep, make sure the tang has been roughed up and has those notches ground in if you're doing that. Make sure your Fitup is as tight as you can get it because no amount of glue is gonna make a sloppy fit look better.
So it look like an F.
No?
Wait, is that backwards? Like that.
Yeah?
Full-tang gang.
Oh, Jesus. What was I saying?
I don't know. Who cares? Hidden-tang bitch. Nobody wants to listen to you. Oh, that's way too hard. This is easy.
Anyways. Oh, yeah. Making sure your Fitup is correct. And then after that is clean off all the surfaces. So like make sure there's no oil, no fingerprints, none of that. You just want to make sure it's all clean so that epoxy actually grabs on. And then I put a little bit of the glue so that it flows down to the bottom of the handle. I coat the tang. I make sure that I dick it in and out so that all the surfaces in there and on the tang are coated in epoxy. Fill the rest, push it on, make sure the Fitup is still where it should be. And then if the Fitup isn't super tight, use some sort of a jig or a clamp to make sure that it stays there. And then check back in an hour and wipe off the excess and see if there's any problems. And if you like our video, make sure you hit that subscribe button and
kick the like button in the dong.
No. But if you do like our stuff, we have a Patreon. There's a Discord server on there. There's some extra videos that we do, like uncut stuff. Like we'll have an uncut version of this.
Leave a comment, hashtag Full-tang gang, and tell Hidden Tangs to suck a big ween.
Shit, is this the right knife? Yeah, it is.
Okay, Jesus, dude. That would have been embarrassing. Good content, though.
Yeah. Is it? Jesus.
Okay.
Now I'm having doubts. One tip, remember which handle goes to what blade.
That's right. Full-tang gang don't have to deal with that shit.
No, I think it's the wrong handle.
because our handles and tangs are ground specifically to match. I thought you were just gonna fucking stab it.
Stab you.